His father held the seat for 44 years and was prime minister twice. Now Brian Manning just barely survived losing it by 673 votes. In the closest race of his life, hit subscribe. Because Brian Manning's story shows what happens when you inherit a political empire and almost lose it all. Brian Manning was born into one of the most powerful families in Trinidad and Tobago. His father Patrick Manning represented San Fernando East from 1971 to 2015, 44 consecutive years. The longest-serving MP in the nation's history, Patrick Manning was prime minister twice, from 1991 to 1995, and again from 2001 to 2010. He shaped Trinidad for decades. He built highways and hospitals. He brought oil money to regular people. He controlled San Fernando East like it was his personal kingdom. Nobody could touch that seat while Patrick Manning was alive. It was his. Brian's mother Hazel Manning is just as impressive. She was Minister of Education and Minister of Local Government during her husband's time in power. She is still active in politics today. So Brian grew up watching power from the inside. He saw how everything worked. He understood the game. He lived in Marabella for years growing up, right in the heart of San Fernando East. These were supposed to be his people, or so everyone thought, but Brian did not jump straight into politics. He got an education first. He went to the University of Maryland in College Park and earned 2 degrees, a Bachelor of Arts in Economics and a Bachelor of Science in Information Systems Management. Then he went back for a Master of Science in Finance and Asset Management. Then he went to the University of Miami for a Master of Business Administration in International Business and Marketing. Brian stacked credentials. He was smart. He was educated. He looked perfect on paper. After school, Brian worked in real business. He was a business analyst at Massey Energy Services. He worked as an investment banker at RBC Caribbean. He was a financing officer at the Inter-American Development Bank in Washington, D.C., focusing on small businesses in the Caribbean and Central America. In 2006, he started his own company called Shining World Consultancy and was executive director. He also worked as an equity analyst at the University of Maryland's Business School. And for 6 months, he was editor of the Business Guardian newspaper. Brian was building a real career outside politics. He was making his own way. He was not just writing his father's name, at least not yet. Then in 2015, everything changed. Patrick Manning lost his seat after 44 years. The shock was massive. San Fernando East had been Manning territory for almost half a century. And suddenly it was gone. Randall Mitchell, a young lawyer in the PM, took over the seat. Patrick Manning retired from politics. He died in July 2016 at age 69 from leukemia. His death rocked the entire country. He had been a giant, a legend, and now he was gone. For Brian, his father's death meant something different. It meant the seat was available. It meant the Manning name could return to San Fernando East. And in 2020, Brian made his move. He told the PM he wanted to contest the seat. But there was a problem. Randall Mitchell was the sitting MP. Mitchell had won in 2015 and served for 5 years. He wanted to run again. So the PM had to choose between Mitchell and Manning, between the guy who held the seat and the son of the legend. In May 2020, the San Fernando East constituency executive held a vote. Brian Manning won 14 votes. Randall Mitchell got 10. But Mitchell's supporters immediately started complaining. They said there were problems with how the voting happened. They sent letters to Prime Minister Keith Rowley saying more than 10 votes had been cast for Mitchell. It was messy. It was ugly. But the party leadership backed Manning. The screening committee approved him as the PM candidate. Mitchell was out. Manning was in. And the Manning name was back in San Fernando East. The 2020 campaign was emotional. Brian filed his nomination papers with his mother Hazel by his side. Supporters flew PM flags everywhere. There were celebrations and drumming. It felt like the Manning family was coming home. Brian told reporters he was humbled by the responsibility. He said it was not just about winning but about proper representation. His mother told the press she was very proud of him. She said he had stayed above all the confusion and was focused on the big picture. She said the people of San Fernando East would appreciate him as they got to know him better. Brian won the 2020 election easily. He got 9,864 votes. The young C candidate got 4,689, a margin of over 5,000 votes. It was not quite the landslides his father used to deliver, but it was solid. It was safe. Brian Manning was now MP for San Fernando East. 4 days after winning, on August 19, 2020, Prime Minister Rowley made him minister in the Ministry of Finance. Brian was following in his father's footsteps. The Manning dynasty was restored. Everything seemed perfect, but then 5 years passed. And during those 5 years, something changed. The PM government struggled. The economy had problems. Crime was out of control. People were frustrated. Prime Minister Keith Rowley decided not to run again in 2025. He stepped down and Stuart Young took over as party leader and Prime Minister candidate. But it was too late. The mood in the country had shifted. People wanted change. And in April 2025, that change came like a tsunami. The ANC swept the election. They won 26 seats. The PAM won only 13. The Tobago People's Party won 2. It was a disaster for the PAM. They lost the government after 10 years in power. Kamla Persad-Bissessar became prime minister again. And across Trinidad, the PM got crushed. The south and central parts of the island turned completely yellow for the ANC. The PM held on in Port of Spain and some other areas. But barely. In San Fernando East, Brian Manning became the only red dot in a sea of yellow. He was the only PM candidate who survived in the entire south and central region. But survival is not the same as winning. When the initial count came in on April 28th, Manning had 7,019 votes. Elibacus had 6,357. Kenrick Surratt from the Patriotic Front had 502. The margin was 662 votes. That is nothing. In 2020, Manning won by over 5,000. Now he was hanging on by 662. Elibacus and the ANC immediately demanded a recount. They said there were problems at polling stations. They said a ballot box at Mon Repos RC school had been left unlocked. They said something was wrong with the count. So the recount began on April 29th at Pleasantville Secondary School. And when it finished on May 5th, the numbers changed slightly. Manning got 7,017 votes, down to from the original count. Elibacus got 6,344, down 13. Surratt got 502. The rejected ballots jumped from 36 to 64. The final margin was 673 votes. Brian Manning kept his seat, barely. The reaction was brutal. Political analysts said Manning now has to work hard to regain support if the PAM wants to keep the seat. Professor Hamid Gaini from UE said any seat won by fewer than 1,000 votes is marginal and difficult to predict in the next election. Dr. Bishnu Raghunath from UT pointed out that San Fernando East is now officially a marginal seat. He said the question is whether the PAM can get back the large vote share it had in 2020, which it clearly lost in 2025. And then Raghunath said something that must have hurt Brian deeply. The son is not the father. He said Brian must forge his own path because constituents are now judging him on his own record and delivery, not on his father's legacy. Think about that. Brian Manning has spent his entire political life being Patrick Manning's son. That is how he got the seat. That is why the party chose him over Randall Mitchell. That is why voters gave him a chance in 2020. But now, just 5 years later, the magic is gone. The Manning name is not enough anymore. People are looking at Brian himself and asking what has he actually done? What has he delivered? Why should we keep voting for him just because his father was great? Brian himself has been mostly silent since the election. He posted a statement on Facebook thanking the people of San Fernando East for re-electing him. He said he truly appreciates that they understood and saw the hard work he put in to serve them. He tried to sound confident, but everyone could read between the lines. He knows he almost lost. He knows the dynasty is crumbling. And he knows that analysts are already saying the seat might flip next time. In his Facebook post, Brian also talked about the bigger picture. He said the PM will rise from the ashes as they always have in the past. He mentioned how his father came back after the 1986 disaster when the NAR swept the election 33-3. He said going forward, fear not, keep the hope alive, and we will do all we can to serve the people. He talked about how a third term in office was always going to be difficult, but all of that sounded like excuses. Like he was trying to explain away what just happened. And what just happened is simple. Brian Manning inherited the safest PM seat in the country. His father held it for 44 years. Nobody thought it could ever fall. Brian won by 5,000 votes in 2020, then he almost lost it by 673 votes in 2025. That is a collapse. That is a disaster. And now everyone is wondering if Brian Manning has what it takes to hold on. Some people are saying Brian should become the next PM leader. Keith Rowley is gone. Stuart Young lost the election and will probably step down. The party needs a new leader, and some think Brian Manning, as the son of Patrick Manning and one of the few survivors of the 2025 massacre, should be that leader. But how can you lead a national party when you almost lost your own seat? How can you inspire confidence when your own constituents barely voted for you? Brian Manning is now 46 years old. He is married to Shelley Das, who he wed on December 12, 2020. Shelley is a former media executive. They are a professional couple with good backgrounds. Brian is still minister in the Ministry of Finance, but that is only because the PM technically still has him in that role until the new government is fully formed. Soon he will just be opposition MP for San Fernando East, and his entire political future depends on what he does in the next 5 years. Can Brian rebuild his support in San Fernando East? Can he prove he is more than just his father's son? Can he deliver results that make people want to vote for him again? Or will 2030 be the year when the ANC finally takes San Fernando East and ends the Manning dynasty forever? These are the questions hanging over Brian Manning right now, and nobody knows the answers. Political analysts are not optimistic. They point out that when a party loses that much support, it is very hard to get it back. The PM lost over 100,000 votes nationwide in 2025 compared to 2020. That is massive. And in San Fernando East specifically, Brian's vote collapsed from nearly 10,000 to just over 7,000. Meanwhile, the ANC candidate went from under 5,000 to over 6,000. The gap closed by over 4,000 votes in 5 years. Another 5 years of that trend and Brian Manning is finished. So what happened to Brian Manning? He inherited a political empire and assumed it would last forever. He thought the Manning name was magic. He thought San Fernando East would always be safe. He was wrong. The empire is crumbling. The dynasty is dying. And Brian is now fighting for his political life in a seat that was supposed to be his birthright. He won in 2025. Barely, but winning by 673 votes is not really winning. It is surviving. And in politics, when you are just surviving, everyone knows you are vulnerable. Everyone knows the next fight might be your last. That is what happened to Brian Manning. And what happens next will determine if the Manning name disappears from Trinidad politics forever or if Brian can somehow rebuild what his father built. Right now, nobody is betting on Brian, and that must be the most painful thing of all.